Gunpowder was a game changer, but it didn't just alter how battles unfolded. This changed everything: who could even afford to fight, how different states were set up, and why certain political systems made it through while others just fell apart. Before gunpowder, fighting a war really came down to how many strong guys you had, how much territory you controlled, and who was actually willing to stick with you. Once gunpowder came along, war totally shifted into something big, like an industry, and it needed a lot of money to run. Winning a war really came down to who had the most money, how well they could move things around, and their knack for turning cash into pure destruction, rather than just how brave or numerous their soldiers were. Most of the time in history, fighting wars didn't cost a whole lot. A sword was something that could stick with you for your whole life. Someone just gave me the armor. Soldiers were often just farmers, really. They'd fight for a season and then go right back home once the battles were over. Big empires, even with all their might, still ran on old-school feudal agreements instead of paying folks a regular salary. War was violent, but it had its economic limits. Gunpowder really messed up that balance. When gunpowder weapons first came out, they didn't instantly change how wars were fought. Back in the day, cannons weren't really all that great. They often broke down, cost a pretty penny, and took forever to reload. But when countries saw what was possible, when old defenses crumbled, when horses in battle became pointless, when just being far away could kill you, the whole money side of war shifted for good. Gunpowder changed how wars were fought. Before it came along, fighting was a lot about manpower, but afterward it became more about having enough money. This change really messed with how much violence costs. A local blacksmith could totally forge a sword. Getting a cannon ready was a whole thing. It needed special metalwork, big furnaces, animals to lug it around, and people who knew what they were doing. A musket, it truly needed a few things to really work well. Everyone making them the same way, a steady supply of well-made powder, and practice drills to keep the firing lines disciplined. Gunpowder weapons just used up a lot of stuff. Every time they were used, it was a waste of resources. We needed more powder. The barrels needed replacing. Cannons cracked. The muskets kept misfiring. War used to be something you'd put money into just once. It just kept costing money. States that couldn't keep up this pace ended up falling behind. Gunpowder really shook things up, basically ending the military edge the medieval nobles had. Knights weren't really powerful because of their awesome moves in battle. They were powerful because they were just too expensive to replace. Being a knight with all their gear meant someone had put in years of hard work and had a serious amount of personal wealth. Gunpowder really wiped out that advantage. Regular guy with a musket could just shoot a fancy nobleman, even if the nobleman had armor on. The battlefield got less about fancy titles and more about paperwork. This whole political change forced itself upon us. To get enough gunpowder armies, rulers just needed a good way to bring in money. Feudal levies just couldn't be counted on. Mercenaries were a tricky bunch. They cost a lot, and you couldn't really trust them. A permanent army, paid in cash, always training, and fully equipped by the state, that was the fix they came up with. Building an army that sticks around means you also need cash that sticks around. For budgets to work, they needed tax systems that were steady, managed by one group, and could actually be made to happen. Gunpowder changed so much more than just armies. It made our government's financial setup what it is today. Think about it. Early modern governments weren't suddenly obsessed with growing their government departments. The truth is, fighting wars with gunpowder changed everything and forced them to collect more taxes. Artillery trains, powder mills, arms factories, and fortifications really drained treasuries. War wasn't just funded by stealing stuff anymore. We had to pay for it up front. This is when borrowing money became a part of fighting wars. The gunpowder wars just cost too much money right off the bat. States started taking out big loans to pay for their campaigns, figuring that winning would make all that debt okay in the end. So military success was directly connected to having money. If a state could borrow money without paying much interest, it could keep fighting for a longer time. When a state lost its investors' trust, it always fell apart fast, no matter how well its army was doing. Yeah, those Italian city-states figured it out pretty quick. Venice, Genoa, and Florence got the money for their ships and cannons from some pretty clever credit markets. Their military strength was all about their money, not how many people they had. Spain eventually realized the situation had a negative aspect. Even though Spain ruled over huge areas and had lots of silver, it kept going bankrupt because its army cost more than it could afford. Gunpowder warfare really showed how weak their money situation was. You can really see the money side of things come through when you look at how they built their defenses. People often think castles were a money pit, but once they were up, they actually didn't cost that much to keep going. Gunpowder definitely made them obsolete. So instead, they built these star-shaped forts. They were low to the ground and had thick, angled walls, all meant to soak up cannon fire. Building those defenses cost a fortune. They needed ongoing upkeep, skilled engineers, and a lot of soldiers stationed there. One strong city might gobble up a whole state's yearly money. Things worse. Fortifications got pricier, so sieges just dragged on longer. If a siege went on for a while, you just needed more soldiers. Bigger armies needed more stuff. To get more stuff, we needed to figure out a better way to move it around. Improving logistics really means beefing up our administrative side. To run taxation, you need administrative capacity. For taxes to work, people either had to mostly agree with them or be forced to pay up. Gunpowder really pushed states to change into structured systems. Stuff like technology just made how we fight wars all the same. Muskets and cannons really shined when folks used them all together in a group. That took a lot of practice, following rules and wearing special clothes. The soldiers, you see, were just pieces in a puzzle, not the big heroes everyone used to talk about. It made soldiers less important in society, while officers and planners gained more influence. War became less about someone's individual bravery and more about how well groups could get things done. If things went wrong, the price to pay went up. Before gunpowder, if you lost a battle, it usually just affected that one little spot. Losing a gunpowder war could totally wipe out a country's bank account. If you lost a war, it wasn't just your land that was gone. Your ability to borrow money took a hit too. Investors didn't forget the defaults. The lenders wanted more interest. Future wars were costing a lot more, even before they started. States that had really big financial markets did better because of this. The Dutch Republic is a good example. It was a small island, not many people, and a tiny military. But boy, could they handle money. They really overachieved despite their size. The Dutch used their bonds to fund ships that went up against big empires. The British did the same thing later on. Britain wasn't in charge of Europe because it had the biggest army. It won out because it could just keep borrowing money at cheap rates to pay for its wars until its rivals simply ran out of cash. Gunpowder really turned war into a test of who could last the longest, who can keep paying. This change completely reshaped how society worked. As wars got more expensive, leaders started taxing trade instead of land a lot more. Customs duties, along with excise and consumption taxes, really took center stage. This really shook things up, pushing political power more toward business folks and bankers. When states upset their richest citizens, they found it tough to gather money. States that brought them into the fold did. This is where the military and industrial worlds really started their partnership as we know it today. They really had to keep coming up with new ideas for gunpowder. We're talking about new calibers, along with better powder and improved metallurgy. States that put money into research got ahead. Some private companies provided weapons. Governments made sure there was a steady demand for something. War started to feel like a complete economy, almost like its own little world of business and trade. Things really heated up for this relationship during the Industrial Revolution, but you can trace its beginnings back to much earlier times, even before that. Gunpowder also made wars expensive around the world. They got things like saltpeter, the stuff for powder, from other countries. Supply chains really reached around the whole world. Whoever controlled the trade routes held all the cards in a military conflict. Ships became super important at sea because they could carry soldiers and supplies, making them vital for both fighting and getting things where they needed. For navies, the costs were particularly high. A warship basically ran on gunpowder. It was like a huge floating factory just churning through the stuff. The folks working the ships needed to be compensated throughout the entire year. The ships always needed fixing. Dockyards turned into big industrial spots. Navies tended to prefer states that had commercial economies and could get credit easily. Countries without direct access to the sea really had a tough time keeping up. Gunpowder made the gap between different states much wider. Smaller states with money and good organization did better than big, poor, broken-up ones. How much stuff a group of people could make was more important than how many people there were. Being good at administrative stuff was more important than being brave, plain and simple. This changed what people thought about power back then. War just kept getting pricier, without end. Every new piece of tech just pushed the costs up. Rifling made guns much more accurate, but to make it work, you needed to build guns. A lot better. Better artillery meant we needed tougher stuff to build it. Things like machine guns, railroads, and explosives just changed the whole cost game, making everything way more expensive. It's pretty clear that technology just made violence more expensive, which was always the basic idea. Back in the 1800s, what countries spent on wars was nearly as much as their entire economies. States put out war bonds to get people's savings for the war effort. Folks really just put their money into making bad things. Inflation really became a weapon. Debt just stuck around. Gunpowder changed everything. Peace became the easier choice in the world. Yet war was something politicians just couldn't get away from. That push and pull really shaped how modern politics works. When governments couldn't handle war expenses, revolutions broke out. Armies spread too thin led to tax revolts, problems with debt, and prices going way up. The link between war and a country falling apart started to be more about money than just fighting. That's a tough pill to... Military technology doesn't just change how we fight, it totally changes how economies work. It picks some political systems and gets rid of others. Gunpowder really pushed countries toward having strong central governments, with career bureaucrats and proper banks. If societies pushed back against those shifts, they ended up getting taken over or sidelined. Still, its memory lives on. Today's wars with drones, missiles, and cyber systems really cost a lot more money to fight. It's like how gunpowder changed everything for soldiers. Now, war is way more about the systems behind it than the folks actually fighting. It's not about being brave, it's about the money coming in. Gunpowder showed countries that you don't just grab power in a second, you buy it bit by bit, over time. It taught us that the real fight is for the money. And the lesson learned was that technology doesn't cut the cost of war, it just makes it pickier. It is often the case that only those with enough money are able to make it.